As housing prices continue to soar, there is reasonable fear that there could be a crash in the housing market in the coming months. And one of the primary reasons cited for a possible crash is a potential foreclosure crisis brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. So today we're going to take a hard look at the data and we're going to see what the numbers say about whether a foreclosure crisis is likely and if it could cause major changes to the US housing market. Before we get into that, I will quickly introduce myself. My name is Dave Meyer. I've been a real estate investor for over a decade, and I'm also the Vice President of Data and Analytics at BiggerPockets. Each week on my YouTube show, I look at the news and data to help investors of all types and experience levels make sense of the economic landscape so they can make good financial decisions. If you're into that whole idea, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel to get more of this content. Okay, let's get into this forbearance, foreclosure, and possible housing crisis. Last year, when COVID rocked the world, a variety of economic concerns came into sharp focus. First, unemployment went nuts as businesses were shuttered and faced this indefinite uncertainty that none of us have really ever seen before. And with that came a very reasonable fear that there would be mass foreclosures in the housing market because homeowners would not be able to afford their mortgages. And as such, the government stepped in and they implemented a ban on foreclosures and a ban on evictions. So rather than banks foreclosing on customers who couldn't pay, the government and the housing industry worked together to develop a forbearance program that allows homeowners to temporarily reduce or in some cases entirely eliminate their payments for a short time. To be clear, homeowners still owe the same amount if they're in forbearance, but forbearance allows them to reduce their costs while they weather challenging economic conditions. When this plan was announced, a lot of people took advantage. At its peak in June of 2020, there was an estimated 4.3 million homeowners in the forbearance program, and at that point, there is a lot of fear that this could increase to 5 million or 10 million or 15 million and could spiral completely out of control and could lead to another housing market crash. And after all, foreclosures played a huge role in the 2007 housing market crash, so people were understandably concerned. And frankly, many people are still concerned. There are a lot of pundits out there saying that the housing market is going to crash as soon as the foreclosure ban is lifted. Personally, I don't think that's going to happen. And let me tell you 3 reasons why I don't see it happening. First, the number of loans in forbearance is going down steadily. Week after week, we see data from the Mortgage Bankers Association that shows declining forbearance numbers. Last year, around this time, there were 4.3 million loans in forbearance, and now there are only about 2 million. So things have been getting better consistently, and that trend is very, very likely to continue. Of the loans that have already exited forbearance, it is estimated that between 85 and 90% of homeowners wind up in good standing. So the people who are leaving the forbearance program are actually leaving in good standing with their bank. They're not leaving because they're going into foreclosure, and that's really good news. But of course, there's still the question of the remaining 2 million loans, and what happens there is still a little bit unclear. Some believe that the 2 million loans are the most risky, right? They are still in forbearance, they could have left already, and perhaps they are the least likely to pay of all 4.3 million that initially entered the forbearance program. That could definitely be the case. On the other hand, some believe that these remaining loans are just people who are staying in forbearance as long as they can. Even if they could resume payments as originally scheduled, they're just going to reduce their payments or stall their payments for as long as they're allowed to. Personally, I think it's a bit of both. There are probably some risky loans in those remaining 2 million, but some are probably going to come out and do just fine. But whatever it is, even with those even if they are risky loans, I still don't think we're going to see this huge flood of evictions due to the second data point here, and that's jobs. Simply put, there are just tons of jobs in the US available right now, so homeowners who are struggling last year should be able to find employment and earn enough to pay their mortgages. And there is early evidence that wages are starting to grow, possibly due to inflation, and that should really help people get back on their feet. This is very different from what happened in 2007 after all. Back then, the entire economy crashed and unemployment was rising at the same time that foreclosures were rising. Unemployment started really growing in about May of 2007 and grew to nearly 10% by 2019. So it was this long 2009, So it was this long, protracted, several-year rise in unemployment. And it actually took 9 years for unemployment to reach where it was in 2006 again. But the situation now is really, really different. Prior to COVID, unemployment was super low at 3.5%, and it really spiked like nothing, frankly, we've ever seen, up to 15%. But it has quickly come back down to below 6%, and this time it's really different. Jobs are just recovering much, much faster. I just said that it took 7 years for employment to get back down below 6% after the financial crisis. This year, it took only 1 year. And even though the jobs numbers have been underwhelming the last few months, unemployment is gonna keep falling. There are nearly 9.3 million job openings right now in the US, which is more than the open number of job seekers, which is estimated at about 7 million. It will take time for each opportunity to find an employee, but employment is going to keep falling. For the housing market, this means that for the most part, people will be able to find work and therefore will more than likely be able to make payments on their mortgages. This sort of is what the government intended when they installed the forbearance program. The worst of the unemployment crisis overlapped with the forbearance program, so many people's homes were saved. Lastly, the last data point I want to talk about here is the quality of loans has increased greatly since the Great Recession. The primary trigger of the housing collapse in 2007 was banks making overly risky loans to unqualified buyers. After that crisis, regulations were put in place to mitigate the risk of another subprime meltdown. And it worked. There are various ways to measure this, but let's just use credit score for this video because it's a pretty simple idea. Just as an example of how much better loans have got, back in the early 2000s, about 15% of all loan dollars went to folks with credit scores under 620. Since then, that number has dropped to below 5%. Simply put, mortgages, no matter how you measure them, are just less risky than they were in the lead up to the Great Recession. So in summary, mortgages in forbearance are going down, there is a strong job market to support homeowners, and the loans that are in forbearance are less risky than those that were foreclosed on back in the Great Recession. So for all these reasons, I don't think we're likely to see a huge influx of foreclosures in the coming months. Yes, when the foreclosure ban is lifted at the end of July, there will absolutely be an uptick in foreclosure activity. There's just no doubt about that. But I'm guessing only a fraction of the 2 million loans still in forbearance will wind up in foreclosure. Personally, I think it's going to be about 500 to 800,000 foreclosures in 2021, which will certainly increase the inventory of homes in the market and cool off the crazy price appreciation we see, but I highly doubt that foreclosures alone will cause a housing market crash. So next time you see someone on YouTube or wherever saying that there's going to be this massive foreclosure crisis, remember that the numbers tell a different story. Yes, there will be an increase in foreclosures, but the numbers will not come close to approaching where we were in the Great Recession, and it will likely just cool the housing market, not cause a crash. I hope all of this information and data has been helpful to you. I greatly appreciate you being here. My name is Dave Meyer for BiggerPockets, and I'll see you all next week. Thanks.